All right, hi. Did you miss me? Okay, so now we're going to talk about preference assessments and reinforcer assessments. So usually when a patient is admitted, we do the preference assessments before we do a functional analysis because it's also, you get good information on what they like and what you might be able to use in a treatment plan. But it's also a good way to build a good therapeutic relationship with them because you're offering them all these different options of cool and fun things. You're playing with them with the items. You're doing fun activities. So it's a great way to get good, helpful information for the admission and also start building a good relationship with them. So we usually do the preference assessment first. For us, again, the patients are with us for 6 hours a day. It takes us about 2 days to get all of our preference assessments done. And then usually we start doing our functional analysis shortly after that. And altogether, our assessment phase usually takes about 2 weeks. And then at that point, we can determine how long they might be a patient with us. Because automatic reinforcement is a lot harder to treat. If we have a patient who engages in self-injury for automatic reinforcement, it might take them a little bit longer than a patient who engages in socially mediated problem behavior. So without further ado, let's get into our preference assessments. So today I'm going to cover 2 different kinds of preference assessments. There are more kinds of preference assessments that you can do. These are the most common. The multiple stimulus without replacement, MSWO, preference assessment, which you have a handout for, another session description, and a paired stimulus preference assessment, PSPA. Some people also call this the paired choice, PC, preference assessments, the same thing, just a different term. And so we'll practice that one as well. Those are the 2 most common. And then we'll talk about reinforcer assessments before we're done. The role play practices that we're going to do one for the MSWO and one for the PSPA. So the purpose of the multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment is to identify preferred items that can be used in treatment evaluations. This preference assessment is really great because it doesn't take a lot of time. It's very quick to conduct. And the PSPA is a little bit longer. So I mentioned that sometimes preference assessments can take us 2 days to do, and that's because the PSPA can be very time consuming, especially if you have a lot of items that you're evaluating their preference for. So typically what we do is we run the PSPA first. Takes a long time to do, but again, that's a good thing because we're just trying to build a good relationship with them anyways. And then every so often throughout their whole admission, we'll do MSWOs, just to account for momentary fluctuations in preference. Because preference changes all the time. I might want to, before I go to bed, scroll on Instagram on my phone. That might be the most preferred thing that I can do. But at a certain point, the blue lights are too much. I don't want to be on my phone anymore. And at that point, reading a book might be the most preferred thing. So preference changes all the time. And so running quick MSWOs is a great way to account for those brief fluctuations in preference. So the first thing that we do before we run our preference assessment is we talk to caregivers or any relevant stakeholder. So this could be if they live at a group home, it could be their group home staff, if they live with their parents, if they, because we have adults, sometimes they live with their siblings, asking them, whoever knows them best, and asking them what some of their favorite things are. There are some standardized questionnaires, like the RAISED, which is, it was published a few years ago, and it breaks down different categories of items, like different kind of foods, different kind of textual items, different kind of visual items, electronic items. And so you would ask the caregivers, like, what are some electronic items that they like? And then you list them down. What are some, sometimes we have patients who like things that are either hot or cold. So are there any kind of sensory things that your child likes? What kind of foods do they like? What kind of snack foods versus sweet foods? Healthy foods, hopefully. We ask them if they like healthy foods too. And so this gives us a lot of information of things that we could potentially identify. So asking their caregivers first is important. So for Bruce, so these are the items that you guys have in your handouts, except for the sticker book. I think you guys have a switch instead. So for Bruce, let's say we're looking at just 5 items. Typically, if you're doing a paired stimulus preference assessment, which we're going to talk about next, you're doing a lot of items, like maybe 10 to 16 items. And then once you have a good hierarchy, usually when we do an MSWO, we take the top 5 from the lengthy one, and we just evaluate the preference between those top 5 items. So let's say the top 5 items for Bruce are his iPad, a puzzle, a sticker book, playing Uno, and listening to music. So the first thing that we do before we do the preference assessment is we give them pre-session access, or pre-session sampling is the more appropriate term. We want to make sure that they know what the items are, especially if you include any new items that they might not know what it is. For example, if the caregiver said that they love stickers, but maybe they've never seen a sticker book before, you might want to show them how it works and let them play with it so that they know what it is. So that when you then do the preference assessment, when they make a choice, it's an informed choice. They know what it is. So you would just give them for each of the items. Even if you know they know what it is, it's just so that you're giving every stimulus the same amount of access. So you'd say this is a puzzle, and then they would play with the puzzle. And here's a quick video of what that looks like.
Hey, Bruce, here's a puzzle.
That's all it is. And so you would just let them engage with the item for a little bit. And this is if Bruce already knows what a puzzle is. He clearly does. If he doesn't know what it is, so like the example that I just mentioned, he loves stickers, but he doesn't know what a sticker book is, you would help him out and show him how to engage with it. And here's an example of what that looks like.
All right, Bruce, here's a sticker book.
So she gives it to him.
Here,
She's not sure how to use it, so she's helping him out.
Sticker, anyone you want. This, and you're just gonna find a page. This one, and you stick it on.
Pretty simple. If you're including any new items when you're doing this session sampling, if they don't seem interested in it at all, I probably wouldn't include it in the preference assessment. So this is also a good method of just showing them maybe new items, and if they seem like they're interested in it, great, include it in the preference assessment. If not, maybe take it out. So then to do the MSWO, you're going to line up all the items that you have in a row, and then they're going to pick one. And then you're going to take it out of the array because it's without replacement. That's what the WO stands for. And then they're going to keep making their selection, and the line's going to get smaller and smaller. So this is what the array looks like. So for Bruce, we had his music, Uno cards, sticker books, puzzle, and an iPad. And to take data, it's also very simple. We just note the order in which he selects something. So whatever he selects first, we're going to put in the number 1 column. And then same for all the other items. So at the start of the session, you're going to seat them in front of the table. You're going to show them what each item is, and then just say, pick one. Whatever they pick, they can engage with for 3 minutes, and you're going to block access to all the other items. So if you have like a small table that you could just move away, that's easy. In the videos, it's a very large table, so Tori takes all of the items just away, and she remembers the order that they were lined up in before she removes them. And so here's an example of that.
All right, Bruce, we have some things today. We have music, Uno, sticker book, puzzle, and iPad. Pick one. Nice job choosing.
All right, and so that's it. And we're not surprised he picked his iPad, right? Because in our functional analysis, we even tested if he engaged in problem behavior to get his iPad, which we didn't see, but we're not surprised that it was the first thing that he picked. So on our data sheet for rank order number 1, we're going to put that he selected his iPad. After that, the stimulus, as I mentioned, is removed from the lineup for all other trials. So the lineup is going to get smaller and smaller. You have to remember the order that they're in if you're removing the items, because you do keep them in the same order, but you're going to take the item from one side, move it to the next, and shift all the other items down. And I think I have a graphic of that right here. Yep, so let's say the lineup was iPad, puzzle, sticker book, Uno, and headphones. And let's say that Bruce selected his iPad, so that's out of the array. The puzzle's gonna move all the way over, and then the other items are gonna shift down, and you're gonna do that after every selection. You can go right to left or left to right, but just make sure you're consistent every single time. So if you pick that you wanna go right to left, always go right to left. Same thing if you did the other. And here's an example. So Tori remembered the order that it was in, and so in her mind, she did all the movement,
Music.
and she's putting them out appropriately.
And sticker book. Pick one. All right, here you go.
And so he picked to have his music next, and we're gonna note that on our data sheet. And we're gonna just keep going in this fashion until he either picks every item or he doesn't make any choice, meaning he doesn't want anything else. If that happens, especially like for the last item, if they just kind of stare at it and they don't want it, you could just put not selected. If there's 2 or 3 items left and they don't want them, you would just put not selected and note which items were not selected. So here's the next trial.
Sticker book, puzzle, and Uno. Pick one.
So he picked his sticker book. And then we have 2 more trials. So look, the line's getting smaller and smaller.
Pick one.
So on our data sheet, we're going to indicate that he picked Uno. And then for the last trial,
Here you go.
it's basically you can have it if you want to. If he just kind of looked at it and he didn't engage, we would put not selected, but he did actually select it. So on our data sheet, we're going to write that puzzle was the last one. And then, of course, we graph our results. So usually, if we were just doing a quick MSWO, just to account for those momentary fluctuations in preference, we would just do maybe 1 series, just see what they like. If we have to pick an item for them to work for in a work session real quick, we might not even graph the results. We might just put some items out, say pick one, they pick their iPad, okay, great, we're working for our iPad right now. So that's how quick they can be. Right before you run any session, you can just pick the reinforcer right there. If you're using an MSWO to come up with more of a clearer hierarchy, which you use the PSPA for usually, I would run multiple series of the MSWO. So if I'm really relying on the MSWO, I'm not doing a PSPA, I would run multiple series of that and then take the average and graph it. So I'd say if you're doing that, maybe 3 series. And so we'll say that this is the average of 3 series with Bruce. So we convert the number 1 equals 100%, and then we just have calculations to have it go down. So we have the percent selected on the vertical axis, and then we have all the items. And not shockingly for Bruce, iPad was the number 1 preferred item for him. Okay, so we're gonna break and we're gonna practice this one. This one's pretty quick and pretty easy. So I'll walk around and answer any questions you have about this. We'll do that hopefully quickly, and then we'll move on to the PSPA, which is a little bit longer. If you guys didn't notice in your material packets, all those the fake toys, that's what you're gonna use to practice. And you could also practice taking data on the dry erase board if you want to. Just put like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Set your items out and take data, and somebody pretend to be Bruce. Okay, so we had a couple of really good questions as we walked around, and a couple of them came up multiple times. So I just wanted to answer some of them for everybody. So a question that came up a few times was, what happens if they don't pick anything? Which can happen, and that just means that they don't like any of your items right now. I'd get different items, get new stuff. And you could do pre-session sampling, show them how to engage with it. That pre-session sampling is very important because you don't want to assume they don't like it because they don't know how to engage with it. So you don't want it to be the case that they didn't pick something because they didn't know what it was. So doing that pre-session sampling is very important. And then if they just don't pick anything, then they don't want anything. So you got to find new items to evaluate. Another question that came up, that was a good question, is what if when you give them access to the item, they engage in problem behavior when you take it away? If that happens, then they might like that item so much that they engage in problem behavior for it. You might see a tangible function that we talked about. So if that's the case, I would remove that item from the preference assessment, possibly run a tangible functional analysis, include that in the tangible condition of the functional analysis, and run it with different items that are not as preferred, that they're problematic. Another good question was, can you engage with them like in a social conversation or engage in the activity with them? Absolutely, especially if they pick Uno, they have to play with someone. Or if they pick soccer, you can play soccer with them. So a lot of the activities, attention is embedded within. Another question was, can you do this with edible preferences? And absolutely you can. Usually we either do an edible preference assessment or a non-edible preference assessment. We try to not mix them, just because they're used in different contexts. There was another question. That was good. I don't know. Does anybody else have any questions right now before I move on that I'm forgetting about? All right, good. Then let's move on to the paired stimulus preference assessment. So the purpose of this preference assessment is to give us a hierarchy of their preferences. So that bar graph that I showed you guys earlier is usually reserved for the paired stimulus preference assessment, because in the paired stimulus preference assessment, every item that you're evaluating is paired with each other. So right here we have a strawberry and we have a marshmallow. So you're going to have the strawberry paired with the marshmallow, so strawberry on the right, marshmallow on the left, and then you're also going to have strawberry on the left and marshmallow on the right, so you're going to swap. So every item is matched with each other, and then the side is swapped, and each one is a trial. So that's why it takes a long time. But once you get to the end, you have a very clear hierarchy of their preferences because they've had multiple trials of choosing strawberry over and over again. So let's say that strawberry comes out as number one. That's because every time it's out, they're picking the strawberry repeatedly. So you have a really good reason for believing that a strawberry is very preferred for this item, or for this individual, I should say. So to start out, same way you would start out with the other one. You only need to ask the caregivers once. We usually do the paired stimulus preference assessment first with our patients, because like I said, it actually works out really well for us that this takes a long time because we're building a good relationship with them. We usually do 2 lengthy preference assessments, one for edibles and one for non-edibles. The edible one does take longer because we don't like to give them too much food at one time, so we'll do maybe a few trials in the morning, a few trials in the afternoon, and a few trials before they leave. The non-edible one, you can run as many trials as you want because you're just doing fun games with them the whole time. So we usually switch back and forth between the 2, and we get the information from the caregivers before we start on what we should include in the preference assessment. So usually there's a lot more items included than the MSWO, but to keep things simple for today's workshop, we're just going to say that there's only 5 items that we're evaluating preference for. Usually it's 10 to 16 items, which makes these very long to do. And again, very important to start with pre-session sampling. And this is especially important if you're doing this before an MSWO. If you've done the whole preference assessment, the PSPA, and you're just doing like a really quick MSWO, you don't have to do the pre-session sampling every time, especially if you're doing an MSWO from 4 items that were in the PSPA. They already know what it is. You've done the pre-session sampling. They went through a whole preference assessment about it, so we don't need to do it again. So this is a data sheet for the PSPA. So you see that each trial, item number 2, so in trial number 1, item number 2 is paired with item number 5. Item number 2 is on the right, and item number 5 is on the left. It's very important that you keep the sides the same, because you'll see down if we go to, I don't know which trial, but you'll see, trial number 17. 5 is on the right and 2 is on the left. So every item is paired with each other and the order is swapped and it's randomized. So you can do this by hand if you want to. This is an example of just doing the counterbalancing by hand. We have an Excel spreadsheet with formulas in it to counterbalance and randomize for us. So we just put the names of the items in, and the computer does the work for us. There are a few softwares that will also do that, but Microsoft Excel has been working for us just fine. If you were to do it by hand, you would just have what are the 5 items. So we'll say that we have items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so on the data sheet, wherever you see the number, you're going to match what that item is. So 2 and 5 we have right there. So our first trial, we have our right item and we have our left item. So to conduct the paired stimulus preference assessment, every time you have a trial, you're going to show them each item, state what they are, and then present both of them. So if we have, I think Tori's holding the sticker book, and let's say it's the iPad, she would say, I have the sticker book, and I have the iPad. And then she'd hold them both out and say to pick one. So we try to keep them, so we try to be directly in front of the patient so that they're not picking a certain item because it's closer to them. So if this stand is the patient, I don't want to say, we have the iPad and we have the sticker book, pick one. They might pick the one that's closest to them. So we want to make sure that we're standing facing them, equidistant. So when we say we have the iPad and we have the sticker book, pick one. And they're both in front of them. So that they're not just reaching for it because it's closer. And then we tell them to pick one. So if the patient approaches one of the items within 10 seconds, we give it to them. And then we remove the other one from sight and we let them engage with the item for an appropriate amount of time, just like with the MSWO. Whatever they pick, they can have for about 3 minutes or however long is appropriate, or whenever they finish, they decide they're done with it. So if we say sticker book, iPad, pick one, they pick the sticker book, they can have the sticker book for a few minutes and I'm going to remove the iPad. And here's an example of what that looks like.
We have a sticker book and an iPad. Pick one.
Pretty straightforward. So data collection. So we take data on how they respond to both items. So the item on the right and the item on the left. So you're not just going to write down iPad, that they picked iPad. You're going to circle an option for how they responded to the iPad and how they responded to the sticker book. So each of these letters stands for an option. So A stands for approach, C stands for consume, AV stands for avoid, and N is no response. So approach means that they went towards the item, but they didn't actually pick it. They didn't actually engage with it, or they didn't actually eat it. So if we say, I have sticker book, iPad, pick one, they start going towards the sticker book, but then they pick the iPad. So for sticker book, I would circle approach, but then iPad, I would circle consume. Consume means they actually either engaged with it or ate it if it was an edible item. So I just mentioned. C means that they actually picked it and they engaged with that item, or if it's an edible, they ate it. AV stands for avoidance. Hopefully you would have identified any items that they really don't like during pre-session sampling. But if for some reason you say, I have the sticker book, I have the iPad, pick one, and they're like, and they really don't like the sticker book, you would circle that they avoided it. Or if they're like, no, I don't want it, you would circle avoid, if that happened for some reason. Usually this doesn't happen though, because we do the pre-session sampling. If something's like aversive and they really don't like it, we would have already found that out and not included that item in this assessment. And N stands for no response. So we circle this one a lot, because if we say, I have iPad, sticker book, pick one, they pick the iPad and they have no response towards the sticker book, I'm going to circle C for iPad, N for the sticker book. They had absolutely no response towards it. And that's the most common outcome. One of them you circle C, the other one you circle N. So for the trial that we just saw,
we have a sticker book.
I'll play it again.
And an iPad. Pick one.
So we would circle N for the sticker book and C for the iPad. Make sense? Okay. So if the patient does not approach either stimulus, you're going to remove them both, represent one more time, and if they still don't make a selection, just move on to the next trial. So if I say I have Uno, cards, and puzzle, pick one. They have no response. I'll just put them both behind my back again. Come up, I have Uno, cards, puzzle, pick one. Maybe they pick one. Great, I'll write down the data. If not, all right, I'm just going to move on to the next trial. And I think I have a video of that. Yes.
We have Uno and a puzzle. Pick one. Uno or puzzle. Choose one.
That's fine. Can we just move on? So we would circle N and N for both of them and move on to the next trial. So this happens a lot. What happens if they want both of the items? So if you say they really love their iPad and they love music, and you're like, I have iPad and I have music, pick one, and they go for both of them. So we tried to block that from happening, usually by just moving back a little bit so they can't do that. And then we'll represent and we'll say, you know, I have iPad, music, pick one. So we tried to make the instruction a little bit more clear, and we might hold the items further apart so they have to go one way or another. And so that is another case where you would do a representation. If it happens again, I would just, so then for the first presentation, that would be approach and approach. But you blocked it and then you ran another one, and let's say that happens again, you would just write approach, approach, and move on to the next trial. Usually, in my experience, when you do the representation and you say pick one and you hold them further apart, that usually works.
We have music or iPad. Pick one. We have music, iPad. Pick one. Nice job choosing.
And so here's a graph of the results. But really quickly, before I talk about the results, I want to talk about something that you have to keep in mind as you're running this. Some individuals have what we call a side bias, which means they just pick everything on the right, or they pick everything on the left. It doesn't matter what's there. If that's happening, this is not the preference assessment to do. You should switch what you're doing. Same thing with the MSWO. I mean, we do that rotation to try to counteract the side bias, but still it could happen. And they're just picking everything, any item that's on the right or the left. And when that happens, I would switch to a different preference assessment. One that I did not talk about today, but is also pretty simple, is called the single stimulus engagement preference assessment. And so in this one, you just give the items one at a time and you track how long they're engaging with the item. So let's say out of a 5-minute session, I give them, it's a 5-minute maximum session, and I'm like, here's your iPad. And we track how long they engage with their iPad, and we usually calculate a % of session that they're engaged with the iPad. And then that session's over, and then I'll say, here is your Nintendo Switch. Same thing. And then we'll probably do 3 series of that, and we'll keep track of which item had the highest percentage of engagement. And so that one you can do when you run into any of the, I think I mentioned that to a couple of people when I was walking around when you were asking questions about what happens if this happens in my MSWO. If the MSWO and the PSPA both don't work out, the single stimulus engagement assessment is a good one to also use. So Bruce's results, so we have 0 to 100% of consumed. So if you ever have an N for an item, it doesn't get included into this graph. And so for Bruce, iPad is his #1 item, which is pretty consistent with his profile. But this is really great because we had multiple items that we included here, and if we want to do a really quick MSWO to make sure that the iPad is still the coolest thing that we have to Bruce, we could just do a quick MSWO of iPad, music, Switch, and Uno, because those are clearly the highest preferred, especially over coloring book, basketball, and puzzle. So if I feel like maybe the iPad, he doesn't like the iPad anymore, I can do a really quick MSWO, and maybe he does like the Switch more today. or just this morning. So that MSWO you can do multiple times a day. And in fact, you should, especially if you're basing some treatment components based on their preference. People's preferences change all the time. If you did, there's actually been a study that was conducted by Iser De Leon and colleagues a few years back, where they studied if you do the PSPA and then you do momentary MSWOs, if the item's different, which one's more reinforcing? And they actually found that when it was different, the item that they picked that day was more reinforcing. And so that is a good reason to do those MSWOs frequently throughout the day. So this is a good preference assessment to do at the beginning to give you a hierarchy of items that you can include in the MSWO, but you should be doing the MSWO regularly to make sure that you have the coolest item in the stockpile for them to work for. Cool? All right, well then let's practice the PSPA and then we'll talk about reinforcer assessments. And if you want, I'm going to put my slide back up for the data sheet. If you want to practice taking data, the options for each one are here. So for each item, so for the item on the left, you're going to have an AC, AV, and N. And for the other item, you're also going to have an AC, AV, and N. So you can practice taking data for the items as well. Okay, the last part of my talk today. So we talked about preference assessments, but now I'm going to talk about reinforcer assessments. So just because something is preferred does not mean it's reinforcing. So reinforcing means that I'm going to work for it. So for example, I really like reading books, but I'm probably not going to go to work my 40-hour-a-week job for books. I'm going to want money. Money is more reinforcing to me than books. I love books, they're very preferred, but I'm not going to work that hard for books. I'm going to need something a little bit better. So that is true also for our patients. So they could really love their iPad, but not enough to work for it. So just because something's preferred doesn't mean it's reinforcing. And the way that we know that something is also reinforcing is if we do a reinforcer assessment. So there are several ways that we can do a reinforcer assessment. I'm going to talk about a couple of them today. One is a progressive ratio, and then another one is a rapid reinforcer assessment. And there's a couple ways that you can do a rapid reinforcer assessment also. So a progressive ratio schedule of reinforcement is an exponentially increasing requirement to access the reinforcer. So for example, we start out, you have to stuff one envelope to get your iPad. Now you have to stuff 2 envelopes to get your iPad. Now you have to stuff 4 envelopes to get your iPad. And now you have to stuff 8 envelopes to get your iPad. And it's going to keep increasing. Then it'll be 16, and then 32, and it'll keep going. So what we're measuring here is when are they going to say, it's not worth it anymore. I don't want to stuff any more envelopes. That's called the break point. And so the way that we know that something is reinforcing is we compare, in this example, it's the iPad, to a control condition or extinction where they're not working for anything. So stuff an envelope. Great, they don't get anything. Now stuff 2. They don't get anything. Now 4, you don't get anything. They're probably not going to do much work at all. So if you see that maybe the break point for the extinction condition is like maybe 1 or 2 schedule requirements, and for the iPad they'll go all the way up to 32 envelopes, then you know that the iPad is reinforcing. You could also use this to compare different preferred stimuli. So if you wanted to compare the iPad to the Switch to a puzzle, you can do that too. And whichever one has the highest break point is the most reinforcing item that you have. You could also do rapid reinforcer assessments. So a rapid reinforcer assessment, one way that you can do this is you have a set number, a time limit on your session. So let's say it's a 3-minute session. Every time you stuff an envelope, you get your iPad. Stuff an envelope, you get your iPad. Stuff an envelope, you get your iPad, and we keep doing that for 5 minutes. And so what I'm going to track is how fast were you working? How many envelopes did you stuff? So essentially it would be how many envelopes per minute, I guess we can convert it to. So kind of a responses per minute, but how many envelopes did you stuff? And you would compare this to an extinction, where they're not working for anything. It would just be stuff this envelope, now stuff this envelope, now stuff this one. And you would just keep going where they wouldn't earn anything. And assuming that they're stuffing more envelopes for the iPad compared to nothing, you have evidence that your iPad is also reinforcing in addition to being preferred. And again, you can have multiple conditions in this as well. You could have the switch, you can have the puzzle, any other item. You can do this for edible items as well if you're using edible reinforcement. We always try to stay away from edible reinforcement whenever possible. And when we do have to use edible reinforcement, we try to make them healthy. But just because they're healthy doesn't mean they want to work for it. So for one of our patients, we did a version of a preference assessment where we had her highest preferred healthy foods, her highest preferred unhealthy foods, non-edibles, so her favorite just tangible non-edible items, and also extinction. So we were comparing the four because we did need to have a reinforcer for one of her problem behavior treatments. And we were really hoping that it would either be the non-edibles or the healthy. Well, of course, every single time it came up with the chocolate chip cookies and the brownies. So we had to give her really small pieces, but she liked celery and she liked grapes, but she was not willing to work for it. It was not reinforcing. She liked her stickers and she liked having her My Little Pony toy, but she was not willing to work for it. The only thing she was willing to work for, unfortunately, was sweets. So we just tried to get, zero sugar sweets, make them as healthy as possible while they still taste the same, and make sure that she'll still work for that item. So it's really important to do reinforcer assessments to make sure that it's preferred and reinforcing, especially if you're going to put it into a treatment plan. Another way that you can do a rapid reinforcer assessment is just tell them that at the end of this session, you're going to get whatever the item is. So it's a 3-minute session. Here are all these envelopes that need to be stuffed. At the end, you can have your iPad. So you could just track how fast they're working for the how many envelopes they stuffed as well, just like the other kind. So I use this one a lot when the reinforcer we're evaluating is something that's time consuming. So for an example, for one of our patients, we were evaluating if he's more likely to work for leisure time on his keyboard, or if he's more likely to work for a community outing to the pond. He likes to walk around the pond. So it's very hard to do this other kind that you see here on the left, because it would have to be envelope, let's go to the pond. Envelope, let's play on the keyboard for 30 minutes. So that's not exactly realistic. So what we did in that case was we just said, here we have to do work for 5 minutes. We're going to stuff these envelopes. When you're done, we can either go to the pond. We were also looking at if he's more likely to work for praise from us versus his parents. He really likes to be told that his parents are proud of him. So we had, that was also a condition that we evaluated. So here's all these envelopes. When you're done, we're going to tell your parents that you're a good man and they're proud. And then they would text back and say that they're proud. Versus from Rutgers praise, we called it. So I would come out of my office and I would say, you're so great. Nice job stuffing all the envelopes. So what we found in that preference assessment for that individual, community outings to the pond was pretty preferred. Actually, what was really interesting, because we also did a preference assessment, the most preferred reinforcer was clothing items. He liked to get clothes, but he worked the fastest for parent praise. So his preference was a little bit different than what we found in the reinforcer assessment. Again, which is why once you find something preferred, you also have to make sure that it's also reinforcing before you include it in a plan. Cool. All right, great. So then I'm going to end. Oh, wait, no, I have a graph, I think, and then I'm done. Yep. So this is a reinforcer assessment for Bruce. So you know that in his treatment plan that we talked about in the very beginning, one of his components, he works for his iPad. And so this is how we got there for his iPad. So one of the questions we asked at the very beginning was, why the iPad in that component? And why the iPad? So in that component, one of the components, it's for helping him during work. We know that work is very difficult based on our functional analysis. He engages in problem behavior to escape work. As I'll show you a graph tomorrow, his compliance is also very low. So even if he's not having problem behavior, he's not doing work. And so we need something to increase his compliance, to increase work. And that's why we picked the iPad. We did a preference assessment. We found out that the iPad is preferred. We then did a reinforcer assessment, found out that it is reinforcing, it's likely to increase behavior, and that's why it's in his behavior plan. So here we have responses per minute. So this is envelopes per minute, like I mentioned. iPad is way more reinforcing than his music, the switch, and also extinction. And so we picked that one. So I'm going to end a little bit early because I didn't save any time for Q&A for FA. And